Remember, hold sweet to this. Keep it in.
Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Storman. Mr. Storman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Storman.
Welcome to Lawline. The vast majority of all negligence cases end up being settled, but often not before the trial stage. Today we'll look at the components necessary for a settlement and the role of the trial judge in facilitating a successful conclusion. Our guests are the Honorable Douglas McKeon, Justice of the Supreme Court, Bronx County, and Guy Smiley, an attorney who specializes in personal injury cases. Hello, Judge McKeon.
Alan, nice to be with you.
Hello, Guy.
Alan, delighted to be here.
Now, Judge, you sit in the trial part in Bronx County with the city. You
Exactly.
have hundreds, if not thousands, of city cases before you.
We've had as many as 8,000 at times, Alan.
8,000 cases. What cases does the city decide before trial to settle, and which ones do they say, no, we'll take a verdict?
Well, when all is said and done, Alan, most cases are settled. Some are more difficult to settle than others. Some are more controversial. Some have as issues in the case things that cause the city a problem in paying a lot of money. There's no magical formula really that goes into it. Obviously, when an Alan Schnorman or a Guy Smiley comes up and represents somebody, lawyers of your particular stature, a case is evaluated one way. We have, for instance, cases that range from being a simple trip on a sidewalk where someone sprains an ankle to cases where a youngster is born in a municipal hospital and is profoundly brain damaged, and for which millions of dollars in compensation is sought. So it's a very, very wide-ranging type of discussion.
However, Judge, it's been said that the city will offer a less amount than if it was a private insurance company. Has that been your experience?
I think that's true, for the reason that they are not an insurance company, and really they're controlling the citizenry's purse strings. Now, I know for those who perhaps represent litigants who are hurt in a personal injury type situation, that's a very often frustrating kind of a situation to deal with. But I think there's a flip side to the coin, Alan. I think the people who represent the city, those who make the decision as to how much to offer to settle a case or resolve a claim, really are looking toward how they'll be viewed by their fellow citizens in doing that.
Now, Guy, I just read about you in the New York Times, and I turned on the TV and I saw you on CNN. You have just got a huge verdict in Brooklyn. I believe it was $1.7 million for a judge, a Supreme Court judge, a sitting judge, against the city of New York.
That's right. This is typical, Alan, of, unfortunately, the city's attitude that they get towards certain cases. This is a case that, quite frankly, we could have settled for a lesser amount of money.
Less than $1.7 million.
Less than $1.7 million, exactly. But for many reasons, the city just refused to discuss settlement. They would not come to the bargaining table. And they said, we can't settle a case because this is a judge, and also because his wife happened to work for the city in the malpractice division of the city, defending the New York City Health
At
and
one
Hospitals
time, she doesn't do it anymore.
No, but her firm, she's now in private practice, and her firm does defense work for the city. So the city said, look, we have to wash our hands of this. We want the jury to place the value on this case.
Well, of course, Guy, there was an added dynamic to that. Almost each and every day, one of our newspapers ran stories about this case. And from the point of view of reading those stories, one would feel somewhat restricted to try to settle a case based on what was written there. And I think, as I say, Alan, there's a human dynamic. You're dealing with human beings who do not want to be criticized for settling a case perhaps more generously than the public feels it should have been settled.
But isn't there also, Judge, a problem in the sense that they don't want to be criticized theoretically by the public, but also isn't that they sometimes make bad business decisions? If they were a private insurance company, they would have had, shall we say, the guts to say, look, we have a problem with this case. This jury can really whack us pretty good. we can, as a business decision, negotiate a way out and save the taxpayers money. And don't you find many times, Judge, they just don't do it? They get hit much harder, and in the end, it's the taxpayer that ends up paying more.
Me?
Yes, you.
Guy,
And us.
I think those representing the city in the personal injury litigation field have made a policy decision that they rather be hit for more money by a jury than to settle cases for the kinds of numbers that fellows like you and Alan Schnurman feel these cases are worth. And the overall goal that they're seeking to achieve is legislation that will put caps on municipal liability, legislation that will take claims against the city of New York away from juries and handle them like we handle claims with the state of New York
that'll
before
be
a
a judge.
Absolutely. And so I believe that what they're trying to do today is to accumulate enough examples of bad jury verdicts to be able to persuade the legislature that we need help.
Judge, don't you think the juries really know what is going on? Don't you think, by and large, with perhaps a few aberrations in the system, that the juries really do the right thing? I have found that to be the case. I've lost cases, and I've said, you know, I hadn't thought of that, but the jury thought of that. And, you know, I think, by and large, if I had to have a case tried, I'd rather have citizens do it than...
He asked the question, then he answers it. Judge?
I'm a great believer in the jury system, and the most pleasant part about dealing with jurors, Guy, is they come in with a degree of reluctance, they really don't want to be there, and then you see them getting interested in the case, becoming involved in the case, and invariably when you thank them at the end of a trial, as I do one-on-one, they tell you it's one of the greatest experiences of their lives. They've made new friends, they have new acquaintances, they just find it to be a very fulfilling experience.
I've even seen some romance blossom in the jury room.
But Guy, what happened in your case? I read in the Times that said you asked the jury for $1.5 million,
Yes.
$1,500,000, and they
Right.
gave you more than you asked for.
Well, I was, as the jury was out, I was thinking, you know, wouldn't it be a great fantasy, as in the Paul Newman movie, The Verdict, if the jury came back and said, Judge, can we award more than the plaintiff asked for? Never dreaming in a million years that this would happen. But it's a rarity. We selected a number that we felt was appropriate for the case, that would not offend the jury's sense of sensibility, and they made the call. I think part of it had to do with the fact that they may have been outraged at the city's defense. They called the judge a liar, the judge whom I represented. And I think
He's a
they took
sitting
offense to
judge,
that.
a
He's a sitting judge in the same courthouse as Judge McKeon.
But you
here.
didn't try it in the Bronx.
No, the city insisted that it be moved to another venue away from
Venue
where...
meaning Brooklyn.
Right, Brooklyn. So the case was tried in Brooklyn.
Well, of course, we seek to keep a view of impartiality, and therefore these cases involving a judge, for instance, in the Bronx, would be tried elsewhere, so that there is less to criticize.
I can understand the city's doing that, but...
Share with us. You have thousands of cases. How do you know what a case is worth? How do you know when the parties ask you, Judge, recommend a number for us to bring us together?
Alan, I can't tell you as I sit here why a broken ankle is worth $50,000 rather than $35,000 or $75,000. What has happened over the years is that we've gotten a body of information, a body of decisional law that tells us this injury is worth that.
In the appellate courts.
Invariably, it's the appellate courts, yes. And of course, it depends on the lawyer as well. I've settled cases with lawyers who are not of the level of a Guy Smiley or an Alan Schnurman for a lot less than I've settled the same kind of an injury with a different kind of a lawyer. And there is no magical formula. We have certain guidelines, there are certain adjustments that are made to a recommendation, and it comes with experience. It comes with doing it each and every day, as I've done for many, many years, and you begin to get a feel for it, an idea of what's necessary. But again, that comes with sitting and discussing, and I must say knowing the law, being able to point out the pitfalls in somebody's case, knowing your customer. It's a negotiating session. It's nothing more than that.
And when do you get a feel that you're close to a settlement? I mean, is it a fingertip sensation?
It is in many ways. And of course, we talk about Judge Price's case, and it's a pending case, so I don't want to discuss it, but a case that has that kind of controversy to it is really a rare case. We're talking about the average kind of a case where somebody falls on a sidewalk. We know, for instance, in the case of a brain-damaged baby, what our appellate courts have said those cases are worth. We know what a bad fracture of an ankle is worth. We know what a knee injury is worth. And really, we're tinkering with those numbers and trying to make adjustments that bring about a settlement, plain and simple.
All right, let's explain that to the viewing audience. If you get $1.7 million on a case, does that mean that's when you get a check the next day?
Hardly. The city has clearly informed me the check is not in the mail. No, what happens typically, the city gets at least 3 bites out of the apple here. They will try to beat the case during the trial. That's 1 bite of the apple. They will make a motion, as they're doing in this case, to reduce the verdict or set it aside.
By the judge?
By the trial judge himself.
Right.
And then if they lose on that ground, they will go to the higher court, which is called the appellate division, consisting of a panel of 5 judges.
And that's what Judge McKean meant as far as values. Even though a jury can give millions of dollars, many times, in many instances, although that's what you read in the newspaper,
yes,
that particular verdict is reduced, and in some cases reduced substantially.
Yes, that can happen. That can happen.
Even more interesting, Alan, is the fact that we have 2 appellate departments covering the city of New York, and the pronouncements for Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island are very often different than those affecting the Bronx and Manhattan. So there's a disparity even among counties as to what the cases
Now,
are
of
worth.
course, what we're talking about, the Bronx and Manhattan are the first department.
That's exactly right.
The rest of the boroughs are the second department.
That's correct.
Although I know we've had many judges from the second department appellate division, and they say, no, we are no different
Well, except if you look
than
at
the first department.
all one has to do is
That's,
open the law books and look at the decisions. You will see
They're more
a very
conservative?
disparate difference. Yes,
Is
much
that
more
the one?
conservative. Why, I don't really know, but they are.
Well, conservative from the point of view of an Alan Schnerman or a guy smiling now, they obviously disagree with that and don't consider themselves conservative. But I think as a general rule, the verdicts permitted to stand are more generous in the first department, Bronx and Manhattan.
Guy, the judge brought up that the city would like to bring these cases away from a jury, bring them to a court, and in addition, put a cap on the amount of monies that an individual can receive for non-economic loss such as pain and suffering. What do you think of that?
I think it's horrendous. All you have to do, Alan, is sit and talk to some of the clients, as I know you have in your own practice, and hear the horror stories, the suffering they've gone through, and to think that the city could arbitrarily say, well, we don't care how much you're suffering, how destroyed your life has been through our negligence, we're putting a ceiling on it, period. I think that is an outrage.
Judge, does there come a time in the settlement process of a case that you know what, this case has to mature a little. We have to take some testimony, we have to hear some of the witnesses, this is not the right time to settle the case.
That's very often the case. And it's very often the case in a more serious situation where a lawyer for an injured plaintiff is seeking a substantial amount of money, and frankly, before somebody writes out a check in that amount, wants to have a little cover, Alan. They want to be able to say, listen, we started a trial, we try to make some dents into this plaintiff, we didn't do very well, and after doing that, we decided that the prudent course to take is to settle the case. So very often, you put somebody to their proof, you see how a certain type of a claimant or a certain kind of a case is going to be presented, and when you get a little bit of a flavor for it, very often then you decide that that's the right time to try to dispose of it.
Of course, that can be a double-edged sword, Judge. If a defendant says, well, let's put the plaintiff to his proof, or her proof, and suddenly the case seems to be getting stronger and stronger, the defendant may now find itself in the position of not being able to settle for the number they would have earlier, because by putting the plaintiff to his or her proof, the case has now gotten to be better from the plaintiff's point of view.
Well, there's another part to that too, Guy. I mean, outstanding trial lawyers of the type sitting at this table have many, many cases to try and are being called upon by various judges to try those cases. And if they can settle a case without having to get ready for trial and move on to the next one, you know, they're more apt to do that. But once they get down and get themselves ready and get into the courtroom and start that presenting process, very often, as Guy has pointed out, they see, hey, I have a great case here, and I'm going to let a jury price it. So that often happens as well.
it does.
Guy, we're going to take a break now, but right after the break, I'm going to say, when is the best time for you to settle a case? You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
Why would anybody give someone they don't know a gift? They do it because this gift saves lives. And the need for it is desperate. We need over 20,000 people to give this precious gift every day. Please give blood. There's a life to be saved right now. Call the American Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE.
Where's Michael?
National Guard duty.
Ah, bet he's just sandbagging.
I don't think so.
Sure he is. He left us with all the big fires to put out.
Over 52% of our military is made up of the National Guard and Reserve. They serve in times of war and in times of disaster. And the jobs they perform are hard enough, without you making it harder.
Well, let's hope he's ready for some late nights when he gets back.
Please support your employees in the National Guard and Reserve.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today we're talking about settling negligence cases. If you want to learn how to get the most for your negligence case, stay tuned. With us is Judge Douglas McKeon, Supreme Court Justice, Bronx County, and Guy Smiley, a noted personal injury attorney. Guy, right before the break, I had asked you, when is the best time to settle your case to get the most money for your client?
Well, it varies due to many factors, of course. Dealing with the municipality, it may unfortunately happen only after you have 6 jurors seated in a box ready to render a verdict.
You selected your jury.
Yes.
Then they come up with the money.
jury. That
Okay.
seems to be the optimum time. And of course, that's become an issue of great criticism by our chief judge, who feels that the juries are being abused, that they're being impaneled, and this can take a good amount of time, though they've
I can understand that.
instituted measures to shorten the time period. And then they're questioned, and they're given the third degree, they're seated in a box, and then suddenly the case is settled. They feel, why couldn't you have done this before? And a lot of...
The judge is shaking his head yes.
A lot of us are questioning,
It's a
why
valid
couldn't this
criticism.
have been done before?
It's a valid criticism.
Yeah, it's a valid
But
criticism.
who controls when a case gets settled?
Well, there are many factors. To a large extent, of course, the defendant does, because they're the ones that have the money, and they make the final determination. There are cases that are settled during phone calls before you even reach the courthouse stage. But primarily, when you're dealing with major cases, you have to be ready to, as they say, show the merchandise.
Alan, in fairness, the municipalities who are sued for these kind of claims today really are in a different situation than the ordinary citizen. For instance, I regularly and routinely deal with claims by inmates at Rikers Island. I mean, people who you wouldn't have over to your home for cocktails, who are making claims because they've been beaten up by another inmate, and frankly, there's a reluctance to sit down and pay these individuals a great deal of money. Now, very often we do resolve them and we do settle them. We have a more controversial type of a case when the municipality is involved. And really, they're called upon to have responsibilities that the ordinary citizen doesn't have. We have an increase in police brutality type claims. As I was talking to Guy before we went on, we have thousands of cases of citizens tripping on the sidewalk. And so the city is being called upon to answer in damages for the kinds of things that the ordinary citizen or the ordinary business is not.
Judge, let's discuss that. Police brutality has become to the forefront over the last number of years. I don't think you could pick up a newspaper in any 1 month without seeing some horrendous claim or actually matter. In fact, I just heard of a huge verdict received in Brooklyn.
Yes.
Multi-million-dollar verdict where a jury, at least this jury, felt that the police officer or officers shot this person without without basis and killed him. What do you really have to show on the part of the police department that they reach a level of brutality as opposed to doing their job?
Well, regrettably, Alan, a lot of these cases have broken down on racial lines. With the Rodney King situation of several years ago, the O.J. Simpson case with the Furman tapes, regrettably, some in our community look upon police in a way that others do not. Some of our African-American citizens are suspect of police work and police testimony. And what we're finding is that, unfortunately, these cases, when tried, often have Caucasian police officers with a minority type of a defendant, and we're seeing that kind of unfortunate situation. To answer your question specifically, I mean, police are supposed to act reasonably. There are guidelines that are supposed to govern police work.
Isn't part of the problem, this has been mentioned even by City Hall, that the police training may be not as thorough and adequate, and also the age at which these young people are becoming officers, they may be a little immature and literally shoot from the hip in some cases. How do you feel about that?
Well, I know that's the argument that's very often made in these kinds of cases. But the reality of it is, Guy, that we find that a lot of officers who have been on the job for many, many years and have really been confronted with all kinds of different circumstances are those who are accused of these kinds of things. And the reason I know that is because I'm asked to do what we call it in camera, meaning the court performing an inspection of their personnel records, which is something that we do when claims are made that the officer has been kept on the force longer than he should have or she should have by reason of their poor performance. So it's really not the younger officer, at least in my experience, that's to blame for this. I think it's probably officers who have become hardened or, in many instances, just don't have the temperament to deal with the situation. Now, in fairness, there's a lot of officers who are wrongly accused just as well.
Guy, let's get to just a little different topic and have two juries.
Okay.
Do you find that one county is better than another county?
Well, if you're talking about from the point of view of, let's say, the plaintiff, generally speaking, I would say there is a difference, and that has to do with the makeup of the juries. I would find that Kings County and Bronx County, for example, the jurors in those counties, by virtue of their makeup, seem to be more liberal. They are
more generous.
More generous. Okay. That's
I like calling something like what it is. Is it because it's more of a working class juror?
I think that has a lot to do with it. I know, for example, when you get out to Westchester County or Nassau County, where you have homeowners, where you have people who are very concerned about insurance rates.
What about Manhattan?
Manhattan used to be known as plaintiff's country. I feel now with the expanded jury pool that it's changed. I think New York County has become conservative.
Some of our, most of our African American and Hispanic jurors are more generous, and I can't exactly tell you the reason why. I think that it's a view of perhaps the downtrodden because of coming from poorer communities. You touched on something before, Alan, and Judge Kay, to her credit, has improved this whole process of selecting jurors, and we are getting more of a cross-section, I find, in the Bronx, and I guess Guy could speak to it in Brooklyn. We are getting some of the homeowners and business people who weren't serving on jurors. We're getting a good turnover of different individuals.
But of course,
you know what may be of interest in this regard? When you are in a jury, and I've said this to juries in summation because I truly believe it, I say to the juries, you have the power to right a terrible wrong. You may never have this power again, but collectively you do. And I think, especially with some of the more downtrodden, they exercise that power. It's a feeling of of importance.
And that's why the city is saying they want to take these cases away from juror's guide, because really the purpose for a jury award in the personal injury field is compensation.
Yes, but if it's a wrong and they compensate it properly, and they have the feeling of power that they can accomplish something. Perhaps I said it in a way that didn't come out exactly as I meant it, but the power to do something to correct a wrong.
Do you find that Manhattan juries really are not representative, are not a jury of your peers, of usually a working class client?
Now it seems to be the case. Yes, you're getting lawyers on the jury, you're getting judges on the jury, you're getting doctors, dentists, people who used to be totally exempt.
Investment bankers, perhaps, who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
That's correct. And a good percentage of the people whom we represent are not in that socioeconomic status, unfortunately. And they are no longer really jurors of peers to that extent. And that may be reflective of the verdict.
Ellen, there's an emotional dynamic to these cases, and Guy put his finger on it just a few seconds ago. This concept in some of our outer boroughs that you can right a wrong, and you do that by a generous award. That doesn't fly quite as well in Manhattan anymore, it strikes me. Again, for the reasons that Guy has stated, the type of person sitting there is of a more conservative nature and is less likely to give out a generous
Judge,
award.
you have thousands of cases before you from the city, and there are parts like yours in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in Staten Island, in Queens. Do you have any suggestions on how to lessen these huge calendars, how to move cases quicker?
Well, we've implemented any number of things, Alan, that the bar has praised. In fact, Guy and I were discussing something I've implemented in the Bronx, which is to treat these trip and fall sidewalk cases differently than the rest of the claims against the city. Maybe 30 to 40% of our caseload are these simple falls on sidewalks. And what we've done is we've set up special calendars to deal with those claims in an expeditious way. Very often these cases can be settled within 90 days after they come into the courthouse. And we're doing really amazing things on that category of case.
Judge, what about what used to be known, and I guess it still exists theoretically, the early settlement unit in the city? In theory, this was supposed to be a way of getting the cases settled even before they reach your courtroom.
A guy, allegedly the Corporation Counsel's office, which is the city lawyer, has aggressively pursued early settlement, so they tell us. My experience is that lawyers prefer to come up before a judge or prefer to come up before me and settle their case early on.
Judge, I've heard numbers of cases being filed against the city every year in the tens of thousands.
It's an amazing amount of cases, and it grows each and every year, and the amounts being paid to dispose of those cases.
I read one article that they pay in excess of $250 million a year.
That's exactly right.
Giuliani says there's an excess in the budget, a surplus of $1.3 billion.
Guy, in the moment we have left, I read one article by Mayor Giuliani. His administration criticized your judge, Judge Price, who got the $1.7 million award by this jury, as being, he should know better, was the quote.
That's an outrage, and the judge personally was offended by that. What does that mean, he should know better? He has the same constitutional right to bring a lawsuit if he's badly injured, severely injured through the city's negligence as anybody else. Since when do judges become second-class citizens? That's the inference of that remark by the mayor.
And with that, thank you very much, Guy Smiley. Thank you very much, Judge McKean, for one more time appearing on Lawline.
Thank you,
and
Alan.
as always, this is Alan Schnorman. Thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law.